3, 2, 1.
Good morning. Today is Tuesday, September 30th, 2025, and this is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearings. All 5 board members are now present, and there are 4 cases on the agenda. The first case is RPC 1403. Okay, we've got somebody with noise. Maybe, okay, there we go. Mr. Penaranda turned his camera or microphone off. Okay, so the first RPC is 1403502G, 671 North Glebe and 4238 Wilson Boulevard. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the board. Lori, good morning. So this is the Ballston Quarter Mall and Office. The 2025 assessment of $83.1 million represents an increase of more than 21% from last year's assessment, despite actual NOI reported at the property remaining virtually unchanged over the past couple of years. On the county's test page, you can see columns C1 and E1 are the property's reported financials for 2023 and 2024. In 2023, NOI was just over 5.6 million. In 2024, it was just over, again, 5.6 million, going from 5.63 to 5.66 million, a difference of 0.5%. So for all intents and purposes, NOI at the property was unchanged in 2023 to 2024. Yet again, the current assessment represents a 21% increase year over year. So what's happened at the property over the past year, and should the assessed value be largely the same as it was last year, given that no significant changes have happened at the property, or is that 21% increase actually warranted? Well, at the property, we know that as of the beginning of 2024, the Macy's that's connected to the property adjacent to it had closed and was planning a redevelopment. Well, now, as of the beginning of 2025, that Macy's had begun demolition. How that has impacted the property is they've had not street closures. They've closed the sidewalks on both Wilson and Glebe. They've forced pedestrian traffic into the roadway on both of those. Those new sidewalks are much narrower than the old sidewalks. It does limit access to the property. They've also removed parking that was available for patrons of the mall. So the parking and the sidewalks have been impacted. You also have an active demolition zone that's happening as of the first of the year. Next, at the property, year over year, occupancy is virtually unchanged from 1 year prior. At the beginning of 2024, the property was 16% vacant. At the beginning of 2025, vacancy was 15%. So looking backwards, we see virtually no change year over year at the property in regards to NOI or occupancy. We see a negative change year over year in terms of accessibility and feasibility due to the demolition and reconstruction going on next door. Yet, given all these changes, no change in operations, change in access, worse access, the assessment did increase 21% year over year, and the county's test represents a 30% increase from last year. So looking at the property's 2024 financials a little closer, we see the property again was 15% vacant throughout the course of 2024. That is a stabilized occupancy for all intents and purposes. We look at the assessment's stabilized vacancy rate, it's 17%. So this property was actually better occupied than what the county has assumed on the assessment. So what it reported over the course of 2024 is essentially reflective of how the property can actually operate at that occupancy. The assessment states if it were only 17% vacant, it would have a reported NOI of just over $8 million. That compares to what it actually reported in 2024 at that stabilized occupancy of $5.66 million. Now, looking at the assessment's assumptions, we see that the potential rental income is overstated by $1.5 million based on a few factors. The movie theater rent is being overstated by $423,000. That tenant has been paying about $1 million a year. That's been some workouts since they've, emerging from COVID, but most recently they've been paying $1 million, and that's what the owner anticipates them to continue to pay. Next, the inline retail rents are nearly $2 a foot higher on the assessment than what is actually in place. Then the vacant retail space on the second and third floors of this building are valued at the same rental rates as the occupied suites on the main floor. The space on the second and third floors that is occupied, there's a church, there's a couple of other smaller tenants. Those are at lower rental rates than tenants on the first floor. The vacant space on those second and third floors has been vacant for years. If you've been through the second and third floors, it is, you're only going up there. This isn't a typical mall, like a shopping mall where, you go to each floor as you go in and do your shopping. It's more or less you typically go to the first floor. If you're going to the second or third floor, it's for a specific purpose. You're not just window shopping on those floors. So it is a little different than most malls because of that. The second and third floor has suffered from high vacancy over the past few years. The few tenants they have on those floors is at lower rental rates than the first floor. Any future tenants are likely going to be at lower rental rates than that first floor rates as well. Finally, the assessment bumped the cap rate year over year by 9 basis points. If you look at the county's write-up on page 3 of the memo, it states that cap rates for similar malls like this have increased by 35 basis points year over year on average. The assessment, again, only bumped the cap rate by 9 basis points. That's a delta remaining of 26 basis points from what cap rates have increased year over year. Now, if you turn to our stabilized potential column in column G, you'll see how we arrived at our claim value. We utilized actual rents in place at the property. We imputed the rent on the vacant second and third floor spaces at a lower rate to account for the chronic high vacancy of these floors. We used the county's vacancy rate of 17%. We grew expenses to account for anticipated expense growth, and we increased the cap rate to reflect first that year over year change of 35 basis points, and secondly, we grew it to account for the increased risk given that nearby construction and the chronic vacancy on those second and third floors. Now, in the county's response, I do want to address there's a special tax assessment that's issued by Arlington County to the owner of this property as part of what's called the Ballston Quarter Community Development Authority. The county contends that this is not an acceptable expense. However, if you do look at the details of this CDA, Community Development Authority, you'll see that the special tax assessment is effectively operates as a micro bid tax. What this CDA tax issued by Arlington County is for, it's to fund public infrastructure around this property in order to facilitate business development and increase the tax base in the county. It is not related to improvements for this property. It's, again, essentially a micro bid tax specific to this couple of blocks in Ballston. It's assessed regularly. The property's reported this the past 3 years, and at least the past 3 years, it's likely been assessed this special assessment going back to when it was created in 2016. This is a public infrastructure improvement tax issued on this specific property. It is appropriate to include it as an operating expense, or in the alternative, treat it the same way the county treats real estate taxes, remove it from OpEx, load the base cap rate with that additional tax load. However, there's no set tax rate for this. It is a special tax assessment, so it's probably more appropriate, more accurate to keep it as a operating expense. In the county's analysis, they've removed it completely. In 2024, this amounted to $1.15 million. Now, I do have this document open. I have read through it. I'm happy to discuss it if there are questions about it. So just please feel free to bring that up. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Roskin for the county, please.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so first of all, to address that the property increased 21% over last year, we have been relatively consistent in valuing this property year over year, and we did not increase it 21%. That was due to a board decision last year, resulting with including a termination fee. Okay, and that's why you see the drastic change there from year over year. Now to address looking at the summary page. When you take a look at column F, which is our test column, okay, I took a look at the rent roll, did an analysis of it. I looked at what were the average rents for the different lease types, you know, your movie theater, your major tenants, inline retail. This has been consistent how we're treating it year over year. And as you can see at the bottom of that column, you look all the way down, you'll see there's a little caption there that shows what the average rent roll was developed. So then based on the vacancy, it's still actually the vacancy is improving. It's actually decreasing. When you take a look at year over year, it's going from 83,000 vacancy down to about 49,000 vacancy rate or vacancy, excuse me. Well, anyways, because of that vacancy, I discounted the rent for each one of those lease types, as you can see, and that was applied in column F. I also asked the question to the owner about, give me a little description about the office lease. And in their email, they stated they used a net effective rent. I used their net effective rent, okay? When you look at the rent roll analysis, oh gosh, I'm sorry. When we look at the rent roll analysis, the office rent that they're reporting is much higher than the net effective. Yes, it's higher. It's higher by about $2.50 compared to what you see on the rent roll. So getting back to the summary page, I went down and I looked at, because the vacancy has been improving, I updated the vacancy rate from the January 1 assessment. And then going further down the line, let's take a look at the expenses. So I did reconstruct the expenses, and the only thing that I reconstructed was removing that special assessment. That special assessment, as Mr. Harmon mentioned, it's tied to a bond. When we look at that, that is the equivalent of a mortgage, okay? This is not a typical annual operating expense. It's, to us, the special assessment, we're treating it just like a mortgage. Therefore, it was removed from the expenses. And when you look year over year, column A2, column B2, and C2, it's consistent. The expenses that we're using are consistent. In fact, I used something a little bit higher in column F. I tested a little bit higher expense rate. Other than that, let's see. Other than that, I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, for Ms. Roskin, can you explain a little bit more about the termination fee and how that impacted the valuation year over year?
Last year, I think I included the termination fee. Okay. And I believe the board had, if you look, I can't remember what page it is. I included your board minutes. They're on page 38. And you reduced it based on us including the termination fee. Well, there's no termination fee included in this 2024 INE.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions? Mr. Hoffman.
So why did it go up 21%?
It was,
What's the math there? That is there an additional tenant? The NOI is higher. Like, what's the math that drove it up 21% if you took the termination fee out?
it's whatever the board had reduced the value to last year. Last year, let's see, what did, what, I'm trying to figure
It
out.
shows one new lease, but it was like a couple hundred square feet. So I don't think it's really driving NOI that much.
Just a moment.
And I guess related to
Yeah.
that, when you show in the summary page, the 2024 operating year, and then you've got operating year reconstructed. Has that been revised to take out the termination fee, or is that still what you presented last year?
The termination fee was last year. Last
Yep.
year as in 2023. There is no termination fee being represented in column E1 or E2 at all.
Okay. So in C2 this year on page 5, the NOI is like 6.5 million. Does that include the termination fee, or have you taken that out?
That may have, C2 may have included it. Maybe. I'd have to look that up.
Because we look at historical trends, you understand? So
Yes.
if we're looking at a trend that includes a fee that we've already disqualified, it's kind of hard to judge, is this slowly, steadily moving upwards, or is there a giant jump for some reason?
Well, like I said, the jump was due to the board's decision last year to reduce it to 63 million. I'd have to look up, maybe one of my colleagues can look up our original January 1 assessment for last year. But when we look at the original January 1 assessment from last year versus this year, it was not a 21% increase.
Okay.
The 21% increase is due to a board decision from last year versus our assessment this year.
Can I ask a different question? The special assessment, is that for all properties in Ballston, or is that just for anything that's like connected to the mall?
Now, it's only specific to this one particular property.
This economic unit?
Yes.
Okay, so nobody else pays this tax?
For this special assessment, it is tied to the bond. So nobody else pays the tax.
Who's
There
the
is
who's
built
the
in-
bond? Who is the bond issuer?
I believe Arlington County.
So it's
So-
the county holds this mortgage, as you call it, right?
Yes.
All right, and so then they charge Brookfield for just this parcel to pay the bondholders coupon rate. I guess some amortization schedule for infrastructure around the mall. Is that accurate? Jordan, is that how you understand it?
So, Mr. Hoffman, there's actually 3 funding mechanisms in the CDA. So they created a joint public-private partnership between Arlington County and the Ballston Mall owner. And this was before they were redeveloping the mall back in the late 2010s. I guess my understanding is there was public infrastructure that needed to be upgraded to support further development. And so somehow the county and the owner came to an agreement, okay, we'll come up with this financing mechanism to get the county's public infrastructure funded. So I'll share my screen to show the CDA. This is page 1 here. You can see the creation of the CDA is to assist in financing the public infrastructure, facilities, and services. So it is a public infrastructure CDA. 3 funding mechanisms: bonds, special assessments, and contributions made by the county for incremental tax revenues within and around the CDA district. So this property has reported the first 2 of those on their expenses. The special assessment was $900,000 for 2024, and then there's a bond payment of $250,000 in 2024. Those have been reported consistently throughout the past few years, I assume going back to the creation of this CDA. But I guess long answer is there's multiple funding mechanisms, but it's to improve the public infrastructure in order to support the redevelopment of the mall back in the late 2010s.
Okay. I guess this is for the county, but we have commercial guidelines that are a little bit wonky because they have a different cap rate for each mall. Do we know if those cap rates were developed with all this information? Is this kind of fed into that 9.6 cap rate that that's being used in the guidelines?
So first of all, the additional cap rate, there's an additional cap rate for the bid. And it
Mhm.
is point, was it point?
0.45.
Yes, yeah. So that's actually added into it. And the cap rate for this particular property is 9.6. And that's based on RERC and PWC guidelines, or their quarterly,
Third quarter
reviewing their
PWC
quarterly, yeah.
guidelines. Yep.
Yeah.
So they probably weren't incorporating a special Boston Improvement District tax in that, loading that into that cap rate. This is
Well-
more like national guidelines.
There's a couple of them. You have the national, you've got the East region, and you have the Washington, DC.
Okay.
Okay, other questions? No? All right, Ms. Ruskin, if you take a minute to wrap up then.
Okay, once again, the test column, I took a look at the rent roll analysis, and I looked at the average rents that was developed, and I applied a discount to each one of those rents, including using the net effective rent that I got from the owner for the office lease. I want to make clear, there is no termination fee that has been included in the 2024 I&E. That did not show up this year. Going down the line, the vacancy was adjusted based on the rent roll analysis. It's showing a 14% vacancy rate. We do not include storage when we develop that vacancy rate. And looking at our expenses, we feel that our expenses are actually a little bit extra than what we're using, or what was developed in column E2. And once again, E2 is excluding the special assessment. That special assessment is like a bond. We treat it like similar to a mortgage, which we do not consider a typical annual expense. And we feel.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up then.
Yes, thank you. So the board set the value of this property at $68,634,000 last year. That was based on using the county's assessment and removing that termination fee income that was not shouldn't have been included. The current assessment is a 21% increase over that board set value last year. Looking at the property to see what's changed year over year, NOI went up by less than 0.5%. 2023 NOI, excluding that termination fee, which is not typically capitalized per appraisal practice. 2023 NOI was 5.63 million. 2024 NOI was 5.66 million. Occupancy at the property is more or less the same as 1 year prior. Really no support for the 21% year over year increase in assessed value. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. All right, it's just among the board. So where are we? Yep, Mr. Huffman.
So I mean, I would propose we remove that special assessment tax from Lori's bottom line number. And when I did that, I came up with an NOI of $6,921,240, which is up from last year's reconstructed number by about 80,000, and which kind of makes sense given that there was like one tiny lease signed in the interim between 24 and 25. So the final number I came up with was 71,759,900, and that's about a $3 million increase from last year.
Okay, where do folks feel about that? Mr. Mendez, yep.
Yeah, I agree. It feels high. I mean, it's a big bump. You look at the NOI year over year, and I don't think that justifies a 21% increase. I was looking for ways to drop it down. I did like the test column income numbers a little bit better, but I think Greg's got it. I would be in favor of Greg's number, 71 million and 759,900. Sounds good to me.
Yeah, and I can expand on the logic behind the special assessment tax. There's no, the cap rate does not consider it whatsoever. So
Right.
if you just kind of take the thought experiment and say, what if the developer had signed an agreement back when they redid this mall that said it was, you know, the tax was 10 times more than that, right? And they had to pay $10 million a year to the county. Then the NOI would be negative, but we'd pull that out, and all of a sudden this building would still be worth $83 million. That just doesn't logically make sense.
Right.
And also the mortgage, the improvements are owned by the county. It's collateral to a bond that the county is the suretor on. It has nothing to do with the mortgage with Brookfield.
Okay. Mr. Yates or Mr. Penaranda? Mr. Penaranda.
Yeah, I did some numbers also using averages and increasing the vacancy on what it was tested. I came up with a number a little bit similar to Mr. Hoffman's, so I'll be okay with that.
Right, it might be cleaner to do Mr. Hoffman's method.
Yes,
Right.
yes, I would definitely support that.
Because I did the same thing. I ran numbers and I was pretty close, but it just seems like this would be an easier way for him to state.
Right.
Okay. All
Okay.
right, Mr.
All right.
Hoffman.
Motion is to reduce to 71,759,900.
And the rationale?
Removing the special assessment tax from the operating expenses on the county's initial evaluation.
Okay, do we have a second? Mr. Mendez, all in favor? Aye, opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. The assessment is reduced to 71,759,900 based on removing the special assessment tax from the expenses of the original assessment. Thank you both. Okay, we keep Mr. Harmon and we pick up Mr. Peralta. Here we go. Okay, next case is RPC 16010040 at North Lynn and North Moore Street. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Yes, thank you. So 1700 North Moore, this is a 430,000 square foot office in Roslyn. It was built in 1979. Now, throughout 2024, this property was at an average vacancy of 28%. That's exactly the same as what the county tells us a market vacancy rate for this property should be. So looking at what the property reported in 2024 when it was operating at 28% vacancy should give us a pretty good indication of what it can expect to operate at on a stabilized basis at 28% occupancy, or I'm sorry, 28% vacancy. So if you take a look at column E on the county's test page, you can see that when the property was operating at stabilization at that 28% vacancy throughout 2024, it reported an NOI of $5,596,000. This compares with the current assessment's assumed NOI of $8.2 million. That's a difference of $2.6 million, a 47% increase over what the property reported in 2024 when it was operating at a 28% vacancy rate. The issues on appeal are the gross effective income, the operating expenses, the cap rate, and the DFL. Looking at the gross effective income, this is row 11 of the county's test page. We can compare what the property reported at stabilization in 2024 on column E with what the assessment assumes the property will achieve also at 28% vacancy on column D. As you can see, the assessment assumes an increase in gross effective in gross income. This is income that is after consideration of vacancy and collection loss, that 28% that the property both had and the assessment assumes. On the assessment, that is 1.75 million higher than what the property reported in 2024, again, when it was actually at 28% vacancy on average throughout the year. That 1.75 million premium is a 15% increase over and above what the property actually reported when it was operating at stabilized occupancy in 2024. Part of the reason the assessment is so high on effective gross income is because the county, it appears to have a math error on office rents. If you look at the county's response on page 2, page 3, and page 5, the county states office rents in place are at $47 a foot. This is incorrect. If you look at page 5, the county shows the total office income of 10.3 million based on the rent roll. Divide that into the total occupied office space of 225,359 square feet, comes out to an in-place rental rate of just $45.82 a foot. So it appears there is a math error on the in-place rental rates of $1.18 a foot, which if we apply the test discount to what the county thought in-place rents were, we see the test intended a discount of $3 a foot, which applied to the actual in-place rental rate gets us to a office rental rate of $42.82 a foot. Now that $3 discount, $3 per square foot, is lower than what the county has done on other offices in the county. If you look at page 71 of our board book, you can see our concession study that we produced for tax year 2025. The concession study looked at 61 different office assessments in Arlington County that we reviewed for this tax year. It compared the assessment's rental rate to the actual rents in place as were known by the county. What this study proves is that the county on average applies concessions of 9% to in-place income. Applying that equalized uniform concession rate of 9% to the in-place office lease rate of $45.82 at this property gets an equalized rental rate of $41.70 a foot. Now, it's appropriate at a minimum to use the equalized concession rate of 9% for this property, given concessions for the past 2 years have been very large at this property. They were more than 17% in 2024 and more than 20% in 2023. More concessions are on the books and will be incurred going forward. Next, we can look at historical operating expenses. Now, the county does make some pretty aggressive adjustments to what the property reported. So what is listed on the county's test page for operating expenses does not actually match what the property reported for tax years 21, 22, or 23. For those 3 years, the county's test page removes an average of 20% of expenses that the owner reported. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the county adjusted the operating expenses for. The expenses reported did not include leasing commissions. The county did not ask any questions about specific line items that they took issues with. So kind of in the dark as to what this 20% in expenses that was removed on the test page for reporting years 21, 22, 23 is. Wish we had a chance to address it before the hearing, but if the board has any issues with it, please ask us. Just know that those expenses reported there are not what the owner actually reported. If you turn to page 37 of the appeal, you'll see what the owner has reported for expenses for those past 4 years. In 2021, expenses were 5.1 million, 2022, 7 million, 2023, 6.9 million, and then in 2024, 6 million. So over those 4 years, expenses averaged just under 6.3 million per year. So expenses over the past 4 years have averaged 6.3 million. Over this same time, the property average vacancy of 28%. So again, it's at the county stabilized occupancy, reporting average expenses of 6.3 million. The assessment assumes expenses of just 5.1 million, and the county test assumes just 5.6 million, both a significant discount to what the property is reported over the past 4 years, despite known inflation in the market, persistent, ongoing for both labor and materials. Next, the assessment assumes a stabilized cap rate for this 1979 building that is 114 basis points below the average stabilized cap rate the county's expert concluded in his report. By all indications, this property is an average building in the county. It's a 1979 build with documented risk to the income stream. At best, it should be assessed using the county's expert Peter Korpax's average stabilized cap rate of 10.12%, instead of basing the cap rate just off the lowest end of that Korpax range. Now, Korpax in his study did provide 13 sales. As info, 12 of those 13 sales Korpax included in his report had cap rates higher than what the assessment has assumed for this property. So 12 of 13 of the county's expert sales that he analyzed were higher than what the assessment has utilized on this property, essentially saying this 1979 build with 28% vacancy over the past 4 years is one of the best buildings in the market. Finally, the assessment's DFL assumes only $90 a foot in TIs. The vacant space at the property of the vacant space at the property, 76% is either in shell condition or second generation space that will need to be demoed and rebuilt. We know from market leases, the cost of that is going to be closer to $125 a foot. So a brief summary, the property was an average vacancy of 28% over the course of 2024, essentially at the county's stabilized market vacancy for this type of property. The property reported an NOI in 2024 of $5.6 million, which is the highest of any of the past 3 years. The assessment, on the other hand, arrives at an NOI of $8.3 million, fully 47% greater than the actual stabilized NOI reported last year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Yes, good morning, everyone. For this property, 1700 North Moore, it's the Roslyn City Center located in Roslyn. This property had undergone renovations in 2021 to include the food hall upside on Moore. As you know, there was a relaunch for the property for that area, a mix of culinary options and a bar, indoor, outdoor space. We know that it's also anchored with the Gold's Gym that also has an outdoor space that was renovated as well. We do see that looking at our summary page. Sorry, let me get there. Yeah, it was $35 million that they used to renovate the property to include modern space and top tier amenities. It included elevator modernization, renovated lobby, all common areas, lobbies on each floor, and exterior work on the facade. So during that time, you see from 21 to 2024 that the property was around 22%, 26% in 2023, and then currently at 31, 32% in 2024. Now, looking at the original assessment, we do see and compare what the county assessed on the property versus what was reported. So column D versus column E. And you'll see I noted that the difference there is about $560,000 when you compare what was reported versus the original assessment minus our vacant square foot. So we have about $5.2 million there that we reported or that we assessed for the vacant space of $129,563. And so when you compare the two, that's the main difference is our vacant square footage. And then looking at the excess, the other income that was calculated for the property as of 2024 versus the reported column E, there's a difference there of $19,220. So in both areas, the occupied space and the other income for the property, the county is low in the original assessment. $560,000 in the leases in place, and then another $19,000 in the other incomes attributable to the property through pass-through income, parking income, etc. And then when you look at how the county reconstructed the 2024 INE in column E1, you see that the difference between E and E1 is the county's income inputs for the vacant square footage. And that is at actually 137,412 square feet versus the original 129,563. So we did account for the added 17,510 square feet of vacancy in the property in the reconstruction, and then followed through with the test to show that income there. With respect to Mr. Harmon's point about per square foot rates for the property, the original assessment had 42.50. So $4.50 less than what I came with the average. And then he's saying that it was closer to $45 a square foot. And so the county still tested at $44 a square foot on our test in column F. So if you take a look at our test sheet, you'll see that at $44 a square feet minus the 28 in vacancy, that comes to the net rent about $32 a square feet for the office, $29.52 for the vacant, and $27.36 for the retail. Going back to the summary sheet, you'll see that the appellant is using the original per square foot rate at $42.50. It's using $40.25 for the vacant space, which is what we have in the original assessment. And then $24.61 for the vacant retail, I'm sorry, for the retail space, whereas the retail average that we found in the property based on the 2024 rent roll is at $38 a square feet. So that's the difference I see with respect to how our test column versus their pro forma plays out. We're at $38 per the rent roll. They're at $24.61. Looking down further, we do see that based on the historical information, I'll walk you through years 21 to 2024, since that was brought up. The county did not remove the majority of these items here. It just noted that from 2021 to 2023 that these items were included. What you see in red was the miscellaneous expenses, 1.9 million, 1.5 million in 2023. Those were removed. If you look at the properties and compare, I mean the expenses from year to year, that is not expense that you would see typical for this property. We believe that was included with the renovation costs, and that we believe that is capital expense that was incurred, that was noted in the 2022 and 2023 INEs. Looking at the 2024 INE, we did see a big jump in legal and accounting fees, and that's why we noted it in red. From 2021 to 2023, you'll see the legal and accounting fees were at best $155,000. In 2024, they reported $828,000. So when we reconstructed, we took 316,023 for legal and accounting, just averaging out the prior 4 years. I believe that was the calculation there, and that came out to 5.6 million for the reconstructed INA, and that's what the county used in our test. I believe that's all I have. Expenses on average for the past 4 years were 5.2 million based on the information that I have, and the 2025 assessment represents a 13.8 decrease from last year. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you both. Okay. Questions from board members? No questions? Okay. Any final comments, Mr. Peralta, in your minute?
Yes. I think the property is well situated. It's 0.2 miles from the metro. They renovated all the interior, and at best, I believe it's advertising $53 a square feet, and there's spec suites on suites 1010, 1500C, 1500D, 1850, 1820, and 2010. So that would command a higher rent per square foot. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, thank you. So this property is interesting because it's been right at that average vacancy of 28% over the past 3 years. The county tells us that's the appropriate vacancy rate to develop an NOI from. So we have 3 years of the property right at 28% vacancy. We don't really need to project too much what it will operate at 28% vacancy. We have the data right there. Page 37 is what the owners reported for those past 3 years. On average, NOI was at 4.8 million over that time frame. So the vacancy's been at the stabilized rate. NOI's been at 4.8 million. Last year was at 5.56 million. Didn't hear any issues with the expenses on 2024. So, 2024 operating at a stabilized occupancy, it's reporting 5.6 million. The assessment's at 8.2 million. That's quite a jump. It just reported 5.6 and the assessment's saying it's going to report 8.2. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. All right, it's just among the board. For folks, Mr. Hoffman.
I mean, the only thing I could really see was the TI below the line at 90. Maybe being a little low. I know sometimes we bring it up to 120 or 125, but it doesn't make a huge dent because it's not a large amount of excess vacancy square footage.
Okay. Mr. Mendez?
Yeah, I don't see an issue with the assessment. Just looking at what the NOI was that was reported, looks like it's up 8.5% year over year, and the assessment itself is down 14 or almost 14% year over year. So with that, I'm okay with it.
Mr. Yates? Your microphone, please. Your microphone was off.
I'm fine with it.
Mr. Penaranda, anything different?
No, I'm okay as well. I think any little change that I made, is not significant. So I'm okay with it.
Okay, so everybody's fine without doing any change. Okay, all right. I'm ready for a motion then.
Sure, I'll move that we confirm the county's 2025 assessment at 90,171,500.
I could second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Mendez and a second by Mr. Hoffman. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Okay, it's unanimous. The county is confirmed at 90,171,500. Thank you both. Okay, same folks, RPC 170140005 at 2000 North 15th Street. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this one.
Yes, thank you. So 2015th Street is a 196,000 square foot office building that was built in 1985. The property has suffered from chronic high vacancy over the past few years, with vacancy at 76% each of the past 2 years, which is up from 66% at the beginning of 2023. The 2025 assessment is a 9% decrease from the 2024 assessment, despite Drea telling us that overall the office market declined by 11% over the course of 2024. This property is clearly distressed with 76% vacancy over the past few years. 1985 build, we know from market sales that comparable properties have sold for about $100 a foot. So we do have multiple comparable properties, comparable in terms of age, build quality, yet those comps did have better occupancy at the time of sale than the subject, and those properties sold for right around $100 a foot. This compares with the current assessment on the subject at $131 a foot, clearly above where the market would value this property. Now, we've heard about those sales being disputed as potential redevelopments, but that begs the question: if the market is valuing vacant office, offices with high vacancy as redevelopment as the highest and best use, that's going to be your top dollar bid, then what's it mean for the value as an operating office? If you were not allowed to redevelop it, say, and you were bidding on this, you would bid lower than you would bid if you want to convert it. So, that logic doesn't really hold water. Dismiss the sales because they want to be redevelopments. That means that the sale value is higher than where it would be if it were purchased for an ongoing concern as an office. So we do have good comps that sold for $100 a foot. The assessment's at 131. That, by the way, is higher than an assessment comp on a neighboring property that the board just heard a week or two ago, 2014th Street. So one block over, 2014th Street, the board did set the value at $126 a foot. This one again is at 131 a foot. The vacancy on the assessment comp at 2014 was 63%. The subject property is 76% vacant. So higher vacancy, similar construction, similar age, similar size, yet the other property, the board set the value at 126 a foot. So extrapolating from that assessment comp just a block away, accounting for the occupancy difference of 13%, gets a uniformed equalized value for this property of about $109 a foot, which would be just under 21,500,000. Now, looking specifically at the assessment and seeing how it got so far above assessment comps just a block away, we see that the cap rate for this property is basically the same cap rate as the market sale of the CoStar building in 2024. That property was a 2017 build. It sits on a prominent corner right there on Wilson Boulevard in Roslyn. It was 98% occupied. It was purchased by an owner occupant who intends to backfill another 150,000 square feet at that property. So in essence, that property was over 100% occupied with the existing demand from the purchaser. So it's a little bit of a stretch to assume that this property, built in 1985, 76% vacancy, worst location, would sell at the same cap rate as a relatively new, fully occupied trophy office building in Roslyn. This property additionally has had vacancy greater than 63% since the beginning of 2023, was 76% vacant as of the start of 24 and 2025. No adjustment for the greater risk to the income stream that is inherent in high vacancy properties has been made to the cap rate on this property. Now, just as for context, this property, if it were in Fairfax County by right assesses it at 125 basis point bump to the cap rate to account for the chronic high vacancy at the property. Next, the assessment fails to account for the cost of reaching stabilization in the current market. Net absorption has been negative each of the past 5 years. Vacancy has increased at the subject property over this time from 30% to 76%. The assessment assumes a potential buyer valuing the property as of the date of value will be able to lease up the property in just 1 year. No potential buyer would assume the property will lease up in just 1 year. And I'll tell you, we speak with appraisers and brokers throughout the year. None of them are assuming a property that is 76% vacant will lease up in 1 year in the current market. There's just no evidence that that can happen or that it does happen. Now, the guidelines also don't require 1 year. They say that they'll be lease up periods will be considered on a case by case basis. Here, the assessments assume just 1 year. We know from the market that this is not going to lease up in just 1 year. As far as the assessment being an annual exercise, what we're hypothetically doing is what will a buyer pay as of the date of value? If we're to assume, oh, okay, next year the assessment will get a 1 year deduction also, that changes the hypothetical. That changes the hypothetical to saying a buyer is going to buy it twice. Once on January 1, 2025, then that same buyer is going to buy it again January 1, 2026. That doesn't happen. A new buyer would be in there. A new buyer would be applying a multi-year discount for lease up. Additionally, the assessment assumes only $90 a foot in TIs. When we inspected this property in 2022, and then we inspected it again 1 year later in 2023, we saw on both inspections that the 11th floor was vacant shell and floors 6, 7, 8, and 9 were all second generation space that would need to be demoed and rebuilt to achieve the market rents assumed by the assessment. Now, I want to briefly touch on Drea's 2024 reconstructed column in E1 on the test page. We've heard Drea testify on numerous occasions that they have to do these and that they present a valid value of where the property should be assessed at. Of course, Drea doesn't actually assess anywhere near these reconstructed values that they testify are valid values. So the question is, if Drea does believe those reconstructed columns present valid representations of value, why do they end up giving this discount? Why do they end up giving all office owners these discounts that they've been testifying to? On this property, Drea shows the property's NOI should actually be $1.1 million higher than where the assessment is. That would result in a value that is nearly $12 million higher than the assessment. So if that reconstructed value is an accurate portrayal of fair market value for this property, as Drea holds it out to be, why have they given that 25% discount on the assessment? You know, I'm a homeowner in the county. I'll tell you, I don't get a 25% discount on my assessment. Are homeowners not being treated in a uniform manner with office owners? If that is an accurate portrayal, if that reconstructed value is an accurate value per DREA, why are they giving these discounts? So, you know, it's either a non-uniform discount or DREA is presenting it knowing that it's artificially high. You know, this one results in a value of $181 a foot. We know sale comps are about $100 a foot. So it seems like it's the latter of the two rationales. It's just an absurdly high number to try to anchor the board's vision and try to affirm the assessment. So those reconstructions do result in very, very high numbers. So it's either the county is giving all these office owners a discount from where they think the value should be, or those values are just, you know, they're kind of moot and they're just used as an anchoring point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Yes, thank you. For this property, it's important to understand where this property is located. It's located close to the courthouse metro, 0.3 miles. And the history of the property kind of speaks a lot to, I guess, the ownership and what they wanted to do versus what they plan to do and what they actually are doing for the property. As you see, in 2021, they were about 33% vacant. 2022, 66%. You'll see that the CoStar notes that are CoStar images that I included included a depiction of a renovated lobby, conference center space, improving the outdoor space. And now that we understand that they filed an amendment to build 394 residential units, we could better understand why it appears to be emptying out the building during this progression from 2021 to 2024. So I would question the validity of the vacancy. Is it due to the market and not being able to lease the space, or is it due to the redevelopment of the property and an owner's decision to create this vacancy? As we know that and see that this property did have I believe, a reduction last year based on the board's decision to reduce it. So like the earlier case, it does show an increase this year, but for all intents and purposes, if you compare the original 2024 assessment versus the 2025 assessment, it is about a 1% increase from last year, from 2024 to 2025, excluding the BOE's decision to, I believe, reduce this property based on the inclination that this property was experiencing high vacancy due to the market and not being able to lease the property versus, in my opinion, the redevelopment of, vacate or letting the vacancy expire and not seeking out new tenants for the property, which would also speak to the CoStar listing that lists no space that is available for this property. As of the review of this case, there is no space available to be leased per CoStar. And that would speak to what I included also was the amendment to build the 394 residential units for this property, on this property. Looking at the original assessment, though, we do see that the original assessment had a rate of $40.25. We know that this property has leases that are in place at $46.40 for the office space. And then we did find that the retail was at $27 a square feet. And then looking at, what we used in the original assessment, $40.25 per square feet for the original space, and then $26 a square feet for the retail space compared to the $27 that we found in the most recent rent roll. We see that the county did reconstruct. We see this with other properties, how the county reconstructs the property, the 24 INE. We take what they reported initially in the leases in place, and then add the vacant square footage income. Now, it's not a discount per se, what the appellant is stating. If you compare their pro forma to what the reconstructed column is, you can see if you change their expenses compared to what was actually reported, the $5.95, they are at 4.3 million. They would be at 4.3 million NOI versus the county's 3.6 million. So when you look at that and try to sway the board into thinking that we're doing something improper and creating a discount, that is truly not the case. I'm happy to go line by line on how we arrived at our test column, and you'll see that it sort of marries with the rent roll that was reported in the 2024 INE. Looking back at the original assessment compared to the test, we did offer a much higher expense rate than what's being reported. And looking at the most, I guess, leased up of the property in 2021, you'll see that they only averaged $9.43 per square foot when they were at 33% vacant on the property. So at $10.50, I think that was aggressive. So we did scale back a bit, 50 cents in the test to come up with $10 a square feet. And going through the excess vacancy below the line, we did find that it was actually higher than the original assessment. And therefore, we asked that the board confirm the original assessment, even though it had a higher expense rate and lower projected income for the leases in place. So with that, we are open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? None? No? Oh, Mr. Yates? I thought so.
To the county, would you just touch on what the vacancy rate history has been for that area?
For the area?
Yes.
I did look at that, and it was closer to the 2021 INE at 33%. I believe I just looked at that this morning, and I believe it was about 35%, if I'm not mistaken. But for the entire Arlington, on average, it was 24%.
Okay, so 30 some in there. Okay.
Okay, no other questions? Okay, Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up then.
Again, just walking you through the history of why it represents a 9% increase is because the board lowered the review 2024 assessment by 12.36%, and then 2025 assessment actually represents a 1% increase if you look at the original assessment. Again, the property is experiencing high vacancy due to the redevelopment, in my opinion. So we do ask that the board confirm the original assessment at $25,621,700. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So that site plan application that Mr. Peralta keeps referencing is dated September of 2025. So just this month it was filed. Now, our task by law is to determine what would this property trade at, willing buyer, willing seller, as the property stands on January 1, 2025, regardless of how, what, or why it is in that condition. This property was 76% vacant. What would a buyer pay for that? We know that this property went back to the lender in 2023. We know that the former owner couldn't make it work for the amount of the outstanding loan. We know that Arlington County has published reports in 2024 stating that 51% of the market is distressed. So we have a highly distressed property in a distressed market. How would a buyer value that as of January 1, as the property stood at that time? Sale comps, we know from the market, are at $100 a foot for properties that are better occupied. We have an assessment comp that the board set the value at $126 a foot. That's just a block away. That property was also better occupied. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. All righty, it's just among the board. Where are folks? Mr. Mendez.
There was a case last week where Mark thought I would be in favor of bumping the cap rate a little bit, and the reason why I didn't on that case was because it was only highly vacant for a year or two. It wasn't much, but this looks like it's been there for 3 years. So I ended up doing that, and I came out to a value of $23,797,000 even. So I'll see if anybody else would do that as well.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that number?
Absolutely, it was $23,797,000 even.
All right. What do folks think about that? Mr. Penaranda?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't really looking at the cap rate itself. I was just mainly looking at what we did with other buildings, increasing the TI to $115 instead of $90 on the reconstruction. Regardless of what the applications are for new projects, or if they're planning on putting the apartment units there. But by doing that increase, I came up with a value of $24,165,800. I think that goes consistent with other buildings that we've seen that we've increased the TIs.
Mr. Hoffman, I'm sorry, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just doing the math on Jose's. So I think I agree with both of you. I think I kind of prefer Jose's number just because it's on a per square foot basis. It's right at where we assessed that other property at 2014th Street in very similar situation. So I think it puts them into equalization.
Okay. Mr. Yates? Turn your microphone on, sir.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that I think when we did it last year, looking back, it was because of the vacancy, and I think the vacancy, and I understand Jordan's position that it didn't come in till 90 or 2025, but I think they've been empty in this building. And I think that compared to the neighborhood and everything else. So I'm not as inclined for the 50 basis points as much, but I would go with what Jose suggested.
Okay. All right, Mr. Penaranda?
Sure. I'll go ahead and move that we reduce the assessment to $24,165,800 based on increasing the TI to $115 per square foot on the reconstructed number.
Okay.
I'll second.
I'm sorry, who said that?
Second.
Mr.
Greg.
Hoffman. Okay, I'm sorry. All in favor? Aye, opposed. Okay, it's unanimous. The assessment is reduced to $24,165,800 based on increasing the TIs to $115 a square foot off of the reconstructed number. Thank you. And then the last case is RPC 1700720 on Wilson and Clarendon Boulevard. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
Yes, thank you. So this is 1500 Wilson. It's a 256,000 square foot office building built in 1971. As of the date of value, this property was 51% vacant. Over the past 4 years, average vacancy has been more than 53%. Now, despite this documented chronic high vacancy at the property, the current assessment is $214 a foot. The issues on appeal are the pass-through income, the cap rate, and the DFL. For the pass-through income and other income, if you look at the assessment in column D of the county's test page, rows 5 and 6 total $454,000. This compares with what the property actually reported for these items in 2024, of just $191,000. So the assessment imputes an extra $263,000 in pass-through income, and that ultimately treats this property in a non-uniform, non-equalized manner, which results in an assessment that is not equalized with peers. The county's standard methodology is to apply the property's prior year pass-through income. Yet in this case, the assessment imputes an additional $263,000 of pass-through and other income. Next, despite the property being over 50% vacant on the date of value and averaging 53% vacancy over the past 4 years, the assessment has chosen a cap rate that is 114 basis points lower than the Corpax report average cap rate for office properties in Arlington County. The Corpax report concludes that the appropriate cap rate to use for an average office building in Arlington County, and this is average. He looks at, I believe, 5 or 6 office properties to come up with his range. All of those are at stabilized occupancies. So he analyzes stabilized properties, comes to a conclusion that the average office in Arlington County cap rate should be 10.116. Yet when we look at this property, it's a 1971 build. It's been over 50% vacant over the past several years, and somehow it's got a cap rate that says it's essentially better than average. This property is not better than average. It's 51% vacant. It's been above 50% vacant over the past 4 years. It's in a market that Arlington County has published reports saying is 51% distressed. So it's a distressed property in a distressed market, and yet it's being imputed at a cap rate that's better than average. The current cap rate, by the way, is lower than 12 of the 13 office sales that Corpax included in his study. So 12 of the 13 offices that were at stabilized occupancy that Corpax chose to study, to include in his study, were all at higher cap rates per Peter Corpax. Next, the assessment fails to account for the cost of lease up to a stabilized occupancy. The assessment imputes 1 year of lease up. The guidelines don't require 1 year. It says it'll be considered on a case-by-case basis. This property has had chronic high vacancy, and yet it still just has 1 year of lease up. When you look at appraisals, they're projecting out 6-year lease up, 7-year lease up. Fairfax County goes out to 7 years. So the lease up period of 1 year is just not realistic in today's market that's had negative net absorption over the past 5 years. Not realistic for the market with 51% of the office space distressed per Arlington County, and not realistic for this property with chronic high vacancy. Next, the TIs are at just $90 on the assessment. We know from our inspection of this property that floors 9 through 14 are all vacant shell. So 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 vacant shell. Floor 7 is vacant shell, and part of the 3rd floor is also shell condition. We also know from market leases that TIs to build out shell space at a property like this will require at least $125 in TIs. Now, looking at the county's response to the appeal, they rely on their reconstructed column. First, I want to point out that here again, income is double counted on that reconstruction. First, that reconstruction counts tenants who are in the building for a portion of 2024 as in place. Then when those tenants had vacated by the first of the year, the reconstruction counts it again as occupying vacant space. So that's double counting. It happens repeatedly throughout these reconstructions, but I also want to look at the value that presents. Drea, on this case, presents a reconstructed value in column E1 on the test page that is 9% higher than the assessment. If Drea believes that that value is necessary and is an accurate portrayal of fair market value, why are they giving a 9% discount to the owner, treating office owners to this discount that's not afforded to homeowners, not afforded to multifamily, not afforded to retail? Now, this isn't something that Drea was, new information they weren't aware of. Almost exactly 1 year ago, Drea presented a reconstructed column with an NOI that they testified was a valid indication of value at basically the same NOI as this reconstructed that they've presented here today. So this is 2 years in a row. The county has presented a value they claim is reflective of fair market value, yet they continue to claim that they're giving a non-uniform discount. If that's not the case, then the only logical rationale is that they know those values are artificially high because of not using a market cap rate. So on October 8th of last year, October 8th, 2024, just 8 days away from today, Drea testified that the correct NOI based on their analysis should be over $6 million. Then on the 2025 assessment, which we know they're creating around the same time, the county used an NOI of just 5.6 million, 7% lower than what they had just presented and testified to the board was an accurate value. So why did this owner get a 7% discount from where Drea's own testimony on October 8th of 2024 stated the fair market value should be? And again, that NOI presented October 8th on the reconstructed column is very close to what's presented here today. So over the course of 2024, nothing changed at the property that would support this discount to where Drea believed the actual value should be. So why is this, property owner getting a discount? Drea's told us 2 years in a row, this is where the value should be, but then we're not going to actually assess it there. So, is that a fair indication of fair market value, or is it just, they know it's too high? They're going to present it to try to get enough affirmation of the lower assessment value. Therefore, they don't really believe that that's a fair indication of value for this property. We know properties of this age and quality and occupancy are documented as selling at around $100 a foot. The county's assessment on this property is $214 a foot. The reconstruction goes up to $233 a foot. These values simply aren't found in the market. Now, we can also look at the county's reconstructions as they relate to actual fair market value as proven by these market sales. Every market sale for the past 3 years has come in much lower than the assessment on those properties. So how is it that we have the assessor telling us that their assessments are way too low? They've applied this discount. They're not assessing at fair market value because that would be much higher. So they're actually being more than fair. There's a discount included. But then we compare those to the actual market data, which is the actual fair market value per Virginia law, and time after time after time, sale after sale after sale, the market tells us the opposite. The market doesn't tell us, hey, the assessments are too low. We're selling for more. The sales tell us the assessments are in fact much too high. So if the county's analysis is accurate, if these reconstructions are good values, why hasn't there been a sale coming in above the assessment? Instead, we have 3 years of sales all coming in well below the assessments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county?
Yes, thank you. For this property, 1500 Wilson, located in Roslyn. It's pretty prominent with the Target situated on the corner, if you will, as you come up Wilson Boulevard. Looking at the property, we know that there's construction or renovations going on based on CoStar, brand new fitness center coming, brand new conference center, new spec suites. When looking at the history, we can see that this property has been leasing up since 2021 to 2023. And then with the new, construction going on, we know that the property has 130,801 square feet vacant. Looking at the county's original assessment, we know that we were low based on the per square foot rate at $46 a square feet. We did find that the leases in place were closer to $49 a square feet, and then $49.36 for the retail space. Originally, the county had $46 for office, and then retail at $48 a square feet. So we were both low on those figures. Also, looking at the 2025 assessment, we can compare that to what we had originally, column C, the 2023 assessment. You see that they reported only 119,602 square feet vacant. Now, if the county were to take that vacancy, we would be understating the amount of vacancy that we thought would be vacant as of 1/1. We did come up with a vacancy that was 9,627 square feet higher than what they reported in the 2023 assessment, and then 1,572 square feet lower than what they actually reported in 2024. So we believe that that assessment, that original assessment, was a good indication of what this property could achieve as far as the vacancy. And then looking at the actual income we did arrive at a value less than what was being actually reported in 2024. So although we were less in the leases in place, we were slightly higher in the pass-throughs, and then that all balanced out. If you compare how we reconstructed it in column E1, you can see that we used the agent's inputs for this vacant space at $38 a square feet. Again, these figures, or that figure, is actually higher than what we had originally projected in the vacant square footage. And then to talk about the reconstruction as if it's a misrepresentation of what this property can achieve. We wouldn't have to do this if the property owners were filling out the I&Es correctly. Again, they don't account for the vacant square footage. I'm happy to walk the BOE through how we came up with our figures. We're actually using the 2024 rent roll figures that were reported. If you turn to our page 5 of the BOE packet, you'll see that $4.35 million is projected for this property. We did use exactly what was given as far as the rents that are in place that average anywhere from $39 a square feet up to $58 a square feet. And with the new leases in play, 2024 leases at $44.50. So again, higher than what we originally projected in the original assessment at $38 a square feet. We find that these leases are coming in at $44.50 and $44 a square feet. So then looking at the major differences between the reconstruction versus the pro forma that the appellant's stating is primarily that rate. They're using $43.68 as a gross rent and then deducting another 28% from that. Whereas in the reconstruction, they're reporting what they actually would achieve given the rent roll that was submitted in the 2024 rent roll, as I referred to on page 5, at 4.3 million. So there's a delta there between the two, about $474,000 per, based on the per square foot rate change from $43 to $46, which was I'm sorry, $49, which is being reported in the 2024 rent roll. So again, looking down at the reconstruction compared to the original assessment, the original assessment is again $438,319 less than what is projected. Given that the projection includes the appellant's vacant square footage at $38 a square feet. So that's the major difference that I see compared to the appellant's numbers, is that per square foot rate. You change that rate and they'll be in line with what the rent roll is reporting. So with that, we do ask that the board confirm the original assessment at $54,717,900. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, for Mr. Harmon, is there anything in the packet that that refers to the vacant shell space floors? You said 9 through 13, 7, and part of the third.
9 through 14, 7, and part of 3. And let me see. I believe we would have included that, but let me find a page for you, Mr. Mendez. So I do have that from my notes on our inspection, that those floors were vacant shell. Let me just see if I can find that in the packet as well. All right, I'm not sure if that was spelled out in the appeal, but we did see that on our inspection when Mr. Peralta and I walked the building, that those floors 9 through 14, 7, and then part of 3, about half of 3 were vacant shell.
Okay. Mr. Peralta, do you have anything different than that?
I can't speak to that. I would have to go look at my notes to see if that was true or not, but
Do you not have your notes with you?
I look it up. I'm sorry. I didn't know that was an issue until today, but I can look it up.
Okay, just-
Yeah, my notes did not have that. I had training ground, installation equipment on first floor. Old Capriati space was used to store equipment for training ground. Third floor amenity space with fitness center and conference center. GSA occupies first level of office area. Sixth floor has spec suites. Jane's is moving into suite 640. 16 and 17 floors occupied by DT Global. And the standalone Starbucks is owned and managed by the building property manager. So that's all the notes that I have.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions? No, Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up then.
Yes, thank you. What I didn't mention, and I should have with the last case, with respect to TIs, when you look at the TIs, it's important to understand that the per square foot that the county is using is conservative at $38 a square feet. Reminding the board again, the averages for the property at $49 a square feet that were reported in the rent rolls. So a property that ingests upwards of $115 per square foot would not rent the space at lower than the average at $38 a square feet. So I would argue against doing so without, if you were to make an adjustment on the TIs, you have to also think about the per square foot rate. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So this property went from 56% vacant in 2021 to 51% vacant as of the date of value. Over the past 4 years, it's averaged 53% vacancy. The assessment assumes $454,000 in total pass-through and other income. The property only reported $191,000 in those items in 2024. By including an above-market pass-through and other income, the resulting assessment is not equalized with peers. It's not uniform. 7 full floors are vacant shell. That's per our inspection, and it's also corroborated by CoStar's data on those vacant floors. The assessment only assumes $90 a foot. We know from market leases that'll be closer to $125 a foot. The assessment also assumes a lease-up period of just 1 year. Based on what this property's actually been able to achieve over the past 4 years, it's gotten just 5% greater occupancy since 2021. So to get to the county's stabilized vacancy of 28% will require an additional 4.5 years of lease up based on the actual history of the property. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. All right, it's just among the board. Mr. Hoffman.
So the earlier case, 1700 North Moore, was a pretty good one to do on the same day because they're both in Roslyn. They both have high vacancy. So I'm comparing the two, and we confirm the county at 210 a square foot for that property. And just looking at it on the surface, new reskin, new food hall, all new leases for the food hall. I guess Google Maps says it's 10 feet from the metro station, whereas this one is like a quarter mile uphill from the metro station. So, I mean, basically in all respects, I view the 1700 North Moore as being a superior property, lower vacancy by 20%. So I don't know how we would assess this one higher on a per square foot basis, which at 214 where the county is. So what I did is basically just recreated what we did last year, which is because we're over 50% vacant. I put 50 basis points on the cap rate, and I ended up at 51,407,200, which is $201 a square foot, compared to 210 on the other case, which I just mentioned. I think should be higher. And then the other thing just to point out is that Target lease is expiring. Jordan didn't mention it, but I would view that as very risky situation right now, as opposed to the food hall in the other building, which is all new, brand new build out.
Okay. Other folks? Mr. Veneranda?
No, the only thing I was looking at is the same as the previous cases, the TIs. I know Mr. Peralta is indicating that we should also look at the rates that they're using, but this is below the line consideration, and I normally try to increase the TIs based on the space that is available and what the condition is, how much it's really going to take to make it available. So that was the only thing I was looking at, is increasing the TI on the assessment. It would reduce the assessment to about $1.25 million to 53,275,900.
And what did you use for a TI?
115.
Okay. Other, Mr. Mendez?
Yeah, I thought about both of those ways of going about it. The only thing for me is I know the burden of proof is on the appellant. I didn't really see enough in the packet to really cement those as being in shell space. Maybe I missed it, but with that in mind, I mean, I would go for Greg's number. It's right on that 50%. It's been about 3-4 years around that range at least. So I would be in favor of bumping up the cap rate. Fine with that.
All right, Mr. Yates?
I would work with the cap rate also. So Greg's number's right there.
All right.
All right. I'll make a motion then to reduce to 51,407,200, using an increase to the cap rate of 50 basis points in the county's original assessment column.
Okay. We got a motion and a second by Mr. Mendez. All in favor? It's 3 and opposed. All right, so it's 3-2 without myself and Mr. Penoranda, but the motion carries. So the assessment is reduced to 51,407,200 based on increasing the cap rate 50 basis points off the original assessment to equalize it with case 2 that we heard here, which was BOE case number 276. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank
Could you restate the value again? I'm sorry.
51 million.
51. Oh, sorry.
That's all right. 51,407,200.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Does anybody else have any other business? Yeah. Okay, then we will stand adjourned here at 10:35. Reconvene tomorrow, Wednesday, October 1st, 9 a.m. in person for board members. Thanks, everybody.
Mary,
Thank
can
you
I
all.
ask Greg a question?
I'm